By midnight, Matteo De Luca would have his lawyers freezing a $120 million hotel deal, and every investor in Baltimore would know it started when Grant Ashford mocked Clara Whitlock's body under the chandeliers of the Halcyon. Before the orchestra finished its next song, the silent mafia boss at Table 7 would ask why Grant's charity auction contained the missing wedding veil of his dead sister. And the woman Grant had chosen to humiliate was not some clumsy backroom girl, but a white, deeply plus-size couture restorer whose soft, heavy body made the ballroom stare, and whose steady hands could spot a fake 19th century stitch before a room full of experts saw the lie. Grant smiled into the charity cameras like cruelty was good manners. He touched Clara's elbow as if guiding her away from a place she had no right to stand, then told 300 donors that some women were built for the back room, not the spotlight. A few guests laughed too quickly. Others looked at Clara's wide hips, her full stomach beneath the burgundy service dress, the way her body occupied space no amount of shame could erase. And then they looked away because pretending not to understand was easier than defending her. Clara did not cry. Her fingers closed around the tiny silver thimble hanging from a chain at her wrist, the last thing left from her mother's old restoration shop. The metal bit into her palm, cold and familiar, reminding her that hands like hers had saved gowns worth more than houses, even if women like Sloane Fairchild only saw the size of her body before the precision of her work. Across the ballroom, Matteo De Luca sat in absolute stillness behind a black onyx auction paddle marked 47. He was a white, dark-haired man in a tailored black suit, silent enough to make powerful people lower their voices. Two bodyguards stood behind him with their hands folded and their eyes on the exits. Matteo owned nothing loudly, but everyone knew he controlled the hotel, the dock contracts, the private security, and the escrow office on the 47th floor where the Ashford Harbor money was waiting to clear. Grant, unfortunately, was too pleased with himself to notice danger, sitting politely in the front row. Clara has always been gifted with fabric, he said into the microphone, his voice warm for donors and sharp for her alone. But presentation matters in our world. Discipline matters. Restraint matters. Sloane hid her smile behind a crystal flute. Clara heard the old sentence Grant had once left in her apartment like a bruise. No man with options chooses a fat girl. Her throat tightened, but her spine did not bend. Instead, her eyes moved to lot 17 beneath museum glass, an antique veil folded like a sleeping ghost. One corner of its label had been restitched with the wrong thread. Almost no one would notice. Clara noticed. That was the curse of being treated like furniture. People forgot furniture had eyes. Grant stepped closer and lowered his voice just enough to wound without being recorded clearly. Don't make this difficult, Clara. You already lost me once. Try not to lose your dignity, too. The ballroom expected her to shrink. She walked down from the stage instead, every heavy, deliberate step forcing the crowd to make room for the body Grant had tried to turn into a joke. When she reached Matteo's table, she bent close and whispered the truth she had never said aloud in that room. My ex called me fat. Matteo's eyes moved from her thimble to Grant, then to the veil under glass. For 3 seconds, he said nothing. Then he turned paddle 47 face up, and the entire ballroom went silent. Tell me again, he said softly, and then tell me why his auction list has my dead sister's wedding veil on it. Clara did not answer Matteo immediately, because the label on lot 17 was wrong in a way that made her stomach drop. Not wrong like a lazy catalog mistake. Wrong like someone had taken an old wound, wrapped it in antique lace, and tried to sell it under bright lights to people rich enough to buy silence. The ballroom waited for her to panic. Grant waited for her to look small. Instead, Clara lifted her chin, her soft, heavy body still angled toward Matteo's table, and said in a voice low enough to tremble, but steady enough to matter, that veil was retagged within the last 6 months. A whisper moved through the donors like a draft under a locked door. One of the auction assistants, a thin young man with a headset and the desperate smile of someone protecting his job, stepped toward her. Ma'am, only certified personnel are allowed to comment on provenance. Clara looked down at the badge clipped crookedly to his lapel, then at the white cotton gloves stuffed halfway into his pocket. Then you should put your gloves on before touching 19th century lace. The assistant flushed. A few people looked away. Sloane Fairchild's smile sharpened. How impressive, she said softly, just loud enough for the nearest donors to hear. The seamstress has opinions. There it was again, the invisible wall Clara had hit her entire adult life. To them, she was hands, not a mind. A broad body in a service dress. A woman useful enough to repair beauty, but too large, too working class, too inconvenient to be allowed near its spotlight. Clara felt the burn crawl up her throat, but she did not give Sloane the satisfaction of seeing it reach her face. She turned back toward the glass case. Under the lights, her reflection hovered over the veil. Round cheeks pale, shoulders wide, waist thick beneath burgundy fabric, every inch of her impossible to ignore. For years, she had tried to fold herself smaller in rooms like this. Tonight, the aisle had opened because people had no choice but to move around her. Mateo noticed that. He noticed everything. He had not risen. He had not defended her. He simply watched from behind paddle 47, dark eyes still, one finger resting against the rim of his untouched glass. Behind him, one of his bodyguards shifted half an inch when Grant stepped closer to Clara, then stopped when Mateo gave the smallest shake of his head. He was not rescuing her yet. He was measuring the room, measuring Grant, measuring her. Grant laughed lightly, the sound polished for donors. Clara restores hems in a basement studio, he said. She gets sentimental about thread. It's part of her charm. The word charm landed like a slap dressed in velvet. Clara's hand closed around her mother's silver thimble until the edge pressed into her palm. She could see her mother's old work table for one painful second. Brown paper envelopes, graphite notes, needles sorted by size. Clara, as a girl learning that fabric, remembered every hand that touched it. She stepped closer to the case. The security guard moved to block her, then hesitated because Mateo's attention cut across the room like a blade. Clara did not touch the glass. She only bent slightly, enough for the overhead light to catch the corner label. The catalog says this came from a private estate in Newport, she said. But the lot code starts with HW, not NP. That isn't an estate mark. That's a workshop intake mark. Grant's smile thinned. You're confused. No, Clara said quietly. I'm careful. The ballroom changed. Not loudly, not kindly, but people leaned forward now. The women who had whispered about her body were suddenly staring at her hands. The donors who had laughed were doing the math of risk. A charity auction with one questionable label was embarrassing. A charity auction with a stolen family relic tied to Matteo DeLuca was dangerous. Clara saw one more thing then, a tiny rust-colored dot near the label seam, half hidden beneath the lace. Not blood, not dirt, old sealing wax, the deep oxblood shade her mother's shop had used only for completed bridal restorations. Her breath caught before she could stop it. Mateo saw that too. His gaze dropped to her thimble, then to the veil, then back to her face, as if the entire ballroom had blurred around them. For the first time that night, the most dangerous man in the room looked at Clara Whitlock not like a witness, not like a victim, but like a woman who had just seen a door no one else knew was there. Mateo looked at Clara as if the rest of the ballroom had become furniture, and for the first time that night, Grant Ashford understood that silence could be more dangerous than a threat. No one moved while Mateo studied the way Clara's fingers tightened around the silver thimble, the way her eyes kept returning to the oxblood but beneath the lace instead of the rich people waiting to dismiss her. Then Mateo lifted 2 fingers from the edge of paddle 47. That was all. The quartet stopped playing mid-note. The hotel manager at the rear doors went pale and touched his earpiece. 2 security guards stepped away from Grant's private auction staff and repositioned themselves beside the glass case without asking permission. Every waiter in the room suddenly lowered their tray. Grant tried to laugh. This is absurd. We are not pausing a 7-figure charity auction because my ex-girlfriend has feelings about thread. The word ex-girlfriend hit the room strangely, turning Clara from staff into scandal. A woman near the front table looked Clara up and down, taking in the breadth of her shoulders, the softness of her arms, The burgundy fabric stretched over her full body, and whispered, "That was his ex," as if Grant dating a woman like Clara required more explanation than stolen lace. Clara heard it. Of course she heard it. Big women learn to hear the sentence before people finish saying it. Still, she kept her gaze on the veil. She would not give the room the collapse it wanted. Mateo did not look at the whispering woman. He looked at Grant. "Who insured Lot 17? He asked. For words, spoken softly, and half the donors stopped breathing. Grant's polished expression flickered. Not fear. Not yet. Calculation. A standard private underwriter, he said. Handled through Ashford Heritage Events. Mateo's eyes cooled. Name. The hotel manager answered before Grant could. Marrow and Finch, sir. He looked ashamed of how quickly he had obeyed. Clara watched Grant's jaw tighten. That was the first honest thing his face had done all night. She looked again at the catalog card beside the veil. Have 0914. Her pulse tapped once hard. The letters were not just a workshop mark. The numbers were wrong, too. Her mother had never written month first. Whitlock Restorations used day, month, year, because her mother had learned under a British conservator who treated American date formats like a personal insult. Whoever forged the intake code knew the letters, but not the habit behind them. Clara almost spoke, then stopped herself. Not yet. Not in front of Grant. Not before she knew who had copied her family's system closely enough to be dangerous. Mateo saw the decision pass across her face. His eyes dropped to her mouth for one controlled second, not with softness, but with a tension so intense it felt like a hand at the small of her back. Then he turned to one of his men. Lock the service elevator. No crates leave this floor. The bodyguard nodded once and walked away. No one asked by whose authority. Sloane Fairchild set down her champagne with a delicate click. Mateo, surely we can handle this privately. Clara is emotional. Grant was unkind, yes, but this is still a professional event. Clara felt the insult wrapped in velvet. Emotional, unprofessional, too large, too hurt, too visible to be believed. Mateo finally stood. The movement was unhurried, but the ballroom seemed to shrink around him. He was tall, white, immaculate in black, with the kind of stillness that made violent men look childish. Ms. Whitlock made one professional observation, he said. Everyone else made noise. The sentence did not defend her. Not exactly. It placed her work above their status, and the room felt it. Clara's throat tightened, but she did not look away. Grant stepped toward the stage, trying to reclaim command. Fine, let her embarrass herself. Open the case. The auction assistant hesitated, glancing first at Grant, then at Mateo, then at Clara's body, as if still deciding whether a woman who looked like her belonged close to something so delicate. Clara's voice cut through the hesitation, quiet but firm. Not with those gloves. The cotton fibers will catch on the lace. Use nitrile, powder-free, and lift from the lower left corner. The damage is already there. The assistant froze. Mateo's eyes sharpened. He had just watched her protect evidence everyone else was ready to ruin. From the far side of the ballroom, Grant's smile returned too slowly, too carefully. Careful, Clara, he said. The more you pretend to know, the worse this will look when people learn you were the last restorer who touched that veil. The whispers stopped all at once. Clara's blood went cold. Mateo turned his head slightly, and this time his gaze on Grant was no longer curious. It was surgical. Grant saw that surgical look and did what cowards in expensive tuxedos always did when cornered. He turned the blade toward the woman with the least protection in the room. You want the truth? He said, raising his voice just enough for the donors, the cameras, and every hungry whisper to catch it. Clara Whitlock was the last person paid to restore that veil before tonight. She had access. She had motive. And now she wants us all to believe she discovered a crime only after I stopped pretending she belonged beside me. The ballroom did not laugh this time. It tightened. Clara felt the judgment land on her body first, then her work, then her past. She stood under the chandelier with every soft, heavy inch of her visible, her burgundy dress pulling at her hips and waist, her shoulders squared as if dignity itself had weight. A security guard glanced at her hands. An auction assistant stepped subtly between her and the glass case. Someone near the champagne table whispered, "Was she really his ex?" Sloane Fairchild rose slowly, all pearl earrings and poisonous grace. "It makes sense now," she said. "This was never about provenance. It was about humiliation. Poor Clara repairs beautiful things for women who actually get chosen to wear them. And somewhere along the way, she forgot the difference between touching a dream and belonging inside it." Clara's fingers tightened around the silver thimble until pain steadied her. She wanted to say that she had not chased Grant, that he had kissed her in the dark of her mother's workshop, praised her hands, eaten takeout beside her sewing machine, then left the moment his friends saw a photograph of them together. She wanted to tell them he had not broken her heart cleanly. He had broken it with instructions. Lose weight, dress smaller, want less, be grateful. Instead, she swallowed the hurt and kept her voice even. "If you have an accusation, make it properly." Grant smiled then, because he thought calmness from a fat woman was arrogance. "Properly? Fiend it." He pulled a cream envelope from inside his jacket and held it up like evidence in a courtroom. A signed intake record from Whitlock Restoration. Her initials, her workshop code, her access note. Clara didn't find the problem. Clara is the problem. The words hit hard enough that even Mateo's bodyguards went still. Mateo did not move, but his hand closed around the base of his untouched glass, and the crystal gave a faint, dangerous click. He was listening to every breath in the room, every person enjoying Clara's disgrace, every staff member deciding whether to obey Grant or fear him. Clara forced herself to look at the envelope, not Grant's mouth. The paper was good, too good, cotton ragstock with a deckled edge. The wax mark was oxblood, almost right. The HW code was almost right. That almost saved her from breaking. Sloane stepped closer, lowering her voice into something sweet enough to rot. "Men like Mateo collect rare things, Clara. They don't choose women who have to be explained before they enter a room." A few cruel smiles flickered. Clara's throat burned, but her chin stayed high. Then Grant made his mistake. He reached for her wrist, intending to lift the thimble chain for the cameras, to turn her mother's last possession into one more prop in her public shame. Clara did not pull away fast enough. Mateo's glass touched the table with a sound so soft it silenced the front row. But Clara was no longer looking at Mateo. She was staring at the envelope in Grant's hand, at the false intake date written in blue-black ink. Her mother's shop had burned down 2 days before that date, and only one person in that ballroom had ever known where the replacement seal was kept. Mateo's surgical stare should have frozen Grant, but Clara moved first. When Grant's fingers tightened around the chain at her wrist, she planted her feet into the marble and did not give him the satisfaction of making her stumble. Her body, the same soft, heavy body he had spent years teaching her to apologize for, became an anchor. The thimble chain pulled taut, the silver flashed under the chandelier, and Grant's polished smile slipped when Clara held her ground like the floor belonged to her. "Let go," she said. Not loud, not dramatic, but every whisper in the ballroom died because the woman they had expected to break had just drawn a line no one else had dared to draw. Grant released her wrist a half-second too late. A faint red mark bloomed against Clara's pale skin, and Mateo's bodyguards both looked at it at the exact same time. Mateo did not move. That was worse. His silence stretched until even Sloane stopped smiling. Clara took one breath, then another, and pointed to the cream envelope in Grant's hand. "You want to make my mother's seal part of this?" she asked. "Then hold it still." Grant scoffed, but his hand twitched. Clara did not reach for the envelope. She knew better than to touch evidence he was trying to hang around her neck. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that the crowd had to make room for the width of her hips, the curve of her stomach, the sheer undeniable presence Grant had tried to turn into shame. The assistant beside the glass case started to object, then stopped when Clara looked at him. "Lift it toward the light," she said. "Unless you're afraid paper can talk." A nervous sound moved through the donors. Grant hesitated. That hesitation was the first crack. Slowly, With the irritated obedience of a man losing control in public, he raised the envelope. Clara's eyes went to the ox blood wax. Her heart hurt so badly she almost lost her voice. The color was right. The stamp was right. The initials were right. But the pressure mark was wrong. My mother's original seal melted in the shop fire, Clara said. 2 days before the date on that intake record. Grant's face did not change, but his throat moved. Clara saw it. Mateo saw Clara see it. After the fire, we used a replacement stamp, she continued. The W had a chip through the left stem. Every Whitlock record after that day carried the flaw. She nodded toward the envelope. That seal is clean. The room changed in a single breath. The people who had been looking at her body began looking at Grant Hand. The assistant leaned forward despite himself. Sloane's champagne glass lowered an inch. Grant laughed too quickly. Convenient story. Clara's fingers opened around the thimble, and for the first time all night, she let them see it clearly. The tiny silver cap, worn dull at the rim, engraved with CW, scarred on one side by heat. Not a story, she said. A burn mark. She turned her wrist beneath the chandelier. I pulled this from the ashes myself. The replacement stamp was ordered the next morning. I remember the date because it was the first day I understood that beautiful things can survive fire and still be used against you. No one laughed. Clara looked at Grant then, not as the girl he had left behind, not as the fat ex he thought would shrink under accusation, but as a professional standing over a forgery. You can use my size to make this room look at me, she said quietly. You do not get to use my mother's name to make them stop listening. Something hard and unreadable passed through Mateo's face. He turned to the hotel manager. Bring the insurer. Now. The command was soft, but the manager nearly ran. Grant's smile collapsed at the edges. From the far side of the ballroom, a gray-haired woman near the donor table rose too fast, knocking her chair against the marble. Clara saw her before anyone else did. Mrs. Evelyn Pike, her mother's former workshop manager. The only person besides Clara who had known where the replacement seal was kept. Mateo followed Clara's gaze, and his voice dropped to a whisper sharp enough to cut glass. Clara, he said, is that woman running for the service doors? Clara's eyes stayed on the gray-haired woman cutting through the edge of the ballroom, and for one painful second, the entire world narrowed to the back of Evelyn Pike's black satin jacket. My mother's workshop manager, Clara said, her voice so quiet the nearest owners had to lean in. And the only person who knew where we kept the replacement seal. Mateo did not shout. He only said, "North doors," and 2 of his men moved so fast the crowd parted before understanding why. Evelyn stopped when she saw them, one hand tightening around her clutch, her face arranging itself into offended innocence too slowly to be convincing. Grant's color drained and came back wrong. Sloane looked at the floor. Clara saw all of it, but she did not smile. There was no triumph in recognizing betrayal, only the sick grief of realizing someone who had once brought coffee to her grieving mother had learned the shape of her pain well enough to forge it. Mateo stepped closer to Clara, not in front of her, beside her, close enough that the room understood the shift, but not so close that he stole the space she had fought to hold. If she runs, he asked softly, what does she destroy first? It was not comfort. It was a test, cold and exact. Clara swallowed. Every eye was on her again. Her full arms, her wide body, the red mark on her wrist, the thimble chain trembling once before she steadied it. The old Clara might have apologized before answering. This Clara looked at the glass case. Not the veil, she said. That's too visible now. She'll destroy the transfer ledger. If she forged a Whitlock intake record, she needed a matching chain of custody file. Paper can be photographed, but ledger ink tells age. Mateo's gaze sharpened. Where? Clara looked past Grant, past the auction staff, to a velvet rope guarding a discreet side corridor. Temporary archive. Behind the donor wall. They wouldn't keep it with the lots. Too many cameras. The hotel manager looked startled enough to confirm it. A murmur moved through the ballroom, different from before. Not cruel now. Mateo handed paddle 47 to his nearest bodyguard without looking away from Clara. Give Ms. Whitlock access. The bodyguard hesitated for less than a heartbeat. Mateo's eyes cut to him. Did I ask twice? No, sir. The black onyx paddle changed hands, heavier than Clara expected, cold as river stone against her palm. Grant stepped forward. You can't be serious. She's a suspect. Mateo looked at him, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop. She protected evidence while you performed for cameras. The sentence landed like a blade laid flat against skin. It was not a declaration of love. It was worse for Grant. It was professional trust. Clara felt the shift ripple through the room. Embarrassed stillness, nervous glances, the sudden recalculation of her worth. She did not let it soften her. I'll need nitrile gloves, a magnifier, and no one touching the ledger before I see the binding. Mateo gave one small nod to the hotel manager, who nearly tripped obeying her. Then, so quietly only Clara heard, Mateo said, You don't have to prove your dignity to them. Clara looked up at him. His face was still hard, still dangerous, but his hand had shifted just enough to block Grant from reaching her again. A protection so subtle the cameras would miss it. I'm not, she whispered. I'm proving the fraud. For the first time, something like respect moved behind Mateo DeLuca's eyes. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced down once, and every trace of softness vanished. Mateo saw the lighter on the screen and moved before the ballroom could understand what had changed. With me, he said to Clara, not as a request, and not as an order meant to own her, but as a decision made around danger. The crowd split as he crossed toward the side corridor, and for the first time, it was not Grant they made space for. It was Clara, walking beside Mateo with paddle 47 in one hand and her silver thimble cold against her pulse. Her large, soft body no longer treated like an inconvenience, but like a force the room had to rearrange itself around. Grant barked something behind them about liability. Sloane whispered into her phone. The service corridor swallowed the music and replaced it with marble silence, security lights, and the hard rhythm of Mateo's men falling in behind them. One bodyguard reached to guide Clara by the elbow, and she stopped so abruptly he nearly collided with her. Don't move me like luggage, she said. The man froze. Mateo turned his head slightly, and the bodyguard lowered his hand. No one touches her, Mateo said. For words, quiet enough to sound almost private. Clara's chest tightened, but she kept walking. I can walk. I need you to think, he answered. The line should have felt cold. Instead, it felt like the first honest compliment anyone in that hotel had given her. They reached the archive door just as smoke began curling from beneath it. Mateo's man punched in a code, but the panel flashed red. Locked from inside. Clara looked through the narrow wire-glass window and saw Evelyn Pike at the cabinet, lighter trembling over the cream ledger pages. The woman's face was wet with panic, not guilt, and that scared Clara more. Guilty people hid. Terrified people burned things for someone worse. Move, one of Mateo's men said, lifting his shoulder like he meant to break the door. Don't, Clara snapped. The bodyguard stared at her. So did Mateo. Clara pointed to the bottom hinge. Fire seal. If you break it inward, the pressure pulls ash across the open cabinet. You'll ruin what she hasn't burned. She pushed closer to the door, filling the narrow space with her steady, undeniable presence. There's a garment cart in the prep room. Steel frame. Rubber wheels. Heavy enough to jam the door open without slamming it. Mateo looked at his men. Do it her way. The words moved through the corridor like a status change. 2 guards ran. A hotel clerk stared at Clara as if seeing her for the first time. When the cart arrived, Clara braced both hands against the steel rail and helped angle it low, using her weight with calm precision, not force but leverage. The door gave with a hard metallic cough. Smoke rolled out. Mateo stepped in first, one arm instinctively cutting across Clara's path. She caught his sleeve. If you want the ledger alive, I go in before your guns. His eyes locked on hers. Dangerous. Furious. Respecting her anyway. He moved half a step aside. Inside, Evelyn dropped the lighter, but not before one corner of the ledger blackened. Clara crossed the room, took the smoking pages with gloved hands from the emergency kit, and pressed them flat beneath a glass blotter before the fibers curled. Ink survives heat longer than paper, she said, breath tight. But only if nobody panics. Evelyn began sobbing. He said she'd ruin everything. He said if Clara spoke, they'd make her look insane. Mateo's face went still. Who said? Before Evelyn could answer, every phone in the corridor buzzed at once. The hotel manager looked down and went white. A breaking Society News alert had just gone live. Clara Whitlock, disgraced former restorer and obsessed ex-lover, suspected of planting forged evidence at Ashford charity auction. Attached beneath, it was a photo of Clara holding paddle 47, cropped to make it look like she was stealing from Mateo DeLuca himself. The alert hit Clara harder than Grant's hand ever had, because it turned her worst private wound into a public headline before she could breathe. Disgraced. Obsessed. Ex-lover. The words glowed on every phone in the corridor, and beneath them was her own body cropped beside paddle 47, made to look like proof of theft instead of trust. For 1 second, the old shame tried to fold her inward. Then Evelyn Pike made a broken sound behind the archive door, and Clara looked up. Grant's private security was already coming down the corridor with 2 hotel staffers trapped between them, moving too fast toward the ledger, toward Evelyn, toward the only surviving pages that could clear Clara's name. Mateo stepped forward, but Clara moved first. She planted herself in the archive doorway, broad shoulders squared, soft, heavy body filling the narrow frame so completely that the men had to stop or put their hands on her in front of Mateo DeLuca. Nobody crosses this threshold, she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied into steel. The ledger is heat-damaged. 1 rush of air, 1 careless sleeve, and you turn evidence into dust. One of Grant's men sneered. Move. Clara did not. The body they had mocked all night became a locked door. Behind her, smoke thinned over the archive table, where the cream ledger lay under glass. 1 corner blackened, the HW marks curling at the edges like burned petals. Mateo's voice came from beside her, low and lethal. Touch her, and lose the hand. No one laughed. Even the phones seemed to go quiet. Grant appeared at the end of the corridor, face flushed, tie loosened, every inch of his charm cracking into panic. She's contaminating evidence, he snapped. Look at the news. She planned this. She stole access from Mateo, forged the record, and now she's performing innocence because that's what Clara does. She takes up space until people mistake it for importance. Clara felt the sentence land, but this time it did not break her. It clarified him. She looked at the burned ledger, then at the alert on the hotel manager's phone. The crop photo had been taken from above, angled through the donor wall camera outside the ballroom. Not from press footage, not from a guest. Internal event security. Ashford Heritage Events had access to that feed. Mateo, she said softly, I need the lights off. Every head turned. Now. Mateo did not ask why. He only looked at the manager. Do it. The corridor dropped into emergency amber. Clara took the manager's phone, turned on its flashlight, and held it low across the burned ledger at a slant. Raking light kissed the scorched paper, and the pressure marks beneath the ink rose like ghosts. Not writing. Indentation. The page above had burned, but the page underneath still remembered the hand that wrote on it. Clara's breath caught. There, she whispered. The insurer arrived, pale and sweating, just as Clara angled the light over the lower margin. The imprint was faint but readable. Transfer authorized by G. A. Media release approved by S. F. Internal camera still attached. Grant stopped moving. Sloane, visible at the corridor entrance, went utterly still. Evelyn began sobbing harder. He told me Clara would ruin us, she choked. He said if I copied the Whitlock seal, no one would believe her over him. The corridor shifted. Not kindly. Not yet. But the loyalty was moving. Staff lowered their eyes from Clara's body to Grant's face. Donors pulled their phones closer, suddenly aware they might be holding evidence instead of gossip. Clara handed the phone back with steady fingers. You used my size to make them look at me, she said, looking straight at Grant. You used my grief to make them doubt me. But you forgot paper keeps pressure, even after fire. Mateo stared at her like the world had just rearranged itself around one woman's hands. Then his own phone buzzed again. This time, it was not a news alert. It was the escrow office. The Ashford Harbor funds were scheduled to release in 5 minutes, unless Mateo stopped them himself. The Ashford Harbor funds were scheduled to release in 5 minutes, and Mateo DeLuca did not look at Grant when he stopped them. He looked at Clara. Smoke clung to her burgundy dress, one wrist marked red where Grant had grabbed her, her silver thimble resting against her pulse like a small burned crown. She stood in the archived doorway, a large, soft-bodied woman once mocked for taking up space, and now every person in that corridor was waiting to see what she would do with it. "Say it clearly," Mateo told the escrow officer on speaker. "For the record." The voice crackled through the phone, thin with fear. "Pending evidence of provenance fraud, media manipulation, and unauthorized transfer documentation, the Ashford Harbor escrow release is suspended." Grant's face emptied. "You can't do that." Mateo finally turned to him. "I just did." The insurer stepped closer to the ledger as Clara angled the phone light one last time over the pressure marks. The indentation rose from the scorched page like a confession refusing to die. G. A. Authorized transfer. S. F. Approved media release. Internal camera still attached. The corridor went so silent Clara could hear Evelyn Pike crying behind her. Donors who had laughed at Clara an hour earlier lowered their phones, realizing they were no longer recording a scandal. They were standing inside one. Grant tried to recover the room, with charm sharpened into blame. "This is emotional theater," he snapped. "She wanted revenge, because I left her." Clara stepped forward before Mateo could answer. Her heavy body moved through the narrow corridor with quiet force, and people moved back, not from disgust this time, but from recognition. She held out her burned thimble and looked at the insurer. "Log the heat scar on this thimble against the fake seal date. Log the ledger indentation against the media release. Log the camera angle against Ashford Heritage's internal feed. Then log this. I did not need revenge to tell the truth. I needed one person in this room to stop laughing long enough to listen." The words landed harder than shouting. The hotel manager lowered his eyes. One of Grant's own security men stepped away from him. Evelyn pointed a shaking hand at Sloan. "She sent the photo. Grant paid me for the seal, but Sloan approved the leak. They said no one would believe a woman like Clara over them." Sloan whispered, "Evelyn, don't." But it was too late. The circle had turned. The donors stared at Sloan now, at Grant now, at the beautiful, thin people who had mistaken cruelty for immunity. Mateo lifted his phone again. "Cancel Ashford Heritage's event contract. Freeze all pending vendor payments tied to the forged lots. Notify Marrow and Finch I'm contesting every insured item under their chain. Send a ledger images to the Federal Art Crimes Unit before Mr. Ashford remembers how to lie." Grant lunged one step forward. Mateo's bodyguard blocked him without touching him. That humiliation was worse. Grant Ashford, who had once told Clara no man with options would choose a fat girl, could not even reach the woman he had tried to destroy without permission from the man standing at her side. "Clara," Grant said, his voice cracking. "Tell him this has gone too far." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She remembered the workshop after the fire, her mother's hands black with ash, Grant telling her to be smaller if she wanted to survive his world. Then she smiled faintly, not cruelly. "Just free." "No," she said. "You went too far when you thought my body made me easy to erase." Mateo took paddle 47 from the bodyguard and placed it in Clara's hand, closing her fingers around the black onyx in front of everyone. "From tonight forward," he said, voice low enough to make the corridor lean toward him, "no authenticated textile, relic, or private estate piece enters the Halcyon without Ms. Whitlock's signature. Anyone who wants access to my rooms, my buyers, or my name goes through her." The status shift was immediate, not symbolic, real. The hotel manager turned to Clara for instruction. The insurer asked her where to secure the veil. Donors who had whispered about her body now stood back with respectful distance, waiting for her approval before even breathing near the ledger. Clara felt the weight of the paddle, the thimble, the eyes, the space. For the first time in years, None of it asked her to shrink. 3 weeks later, the Ashford Harbor project was dead. Grant's investors had fled, Sloan's engagement announcement had vanished from every society page, and the charity board had removed both their names in a statement, so cold it read like an obituary. At the Halcyon, the old back restoration room reopened under a new brass sign. Atelier Whitlock DeLuca. The logo was a silver thimble crossed with a number 47 on black onyx. Clara walked into the winter gala in deep emerald velvet, her large body luminous beneath the chandeliers, every soft curve held with calm, unapologetic grace. Conversation stopped. This time, not because they were judging her, because they were waiting for her. Mateo entered half a step behind her, not hiding her, not explaining her, not using her as decoration. When a donor tried to speak past Clara to him, Mateo did not even glance over. "Ask Ms. Whitlock," he said. "She is the only woman in this room I trust with my name." Clara touched her mother's thimble, looked across the ballroom that had once tried to make her small, and let herself stand fully in the light. If this story made you feel something, like the video, subscribe for more dark romance revenge stories, and tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Clara holding the doorway, Mateo freezing the money, or the final crown scene at the Halcyon.